Welcome to Sunday Night Prime, and I'm delighted to have you this evening, and we have a very, very interesting guest. If you want to get hold of me, you know we don't take calls right off the radio now or the television. So if you want to contact me, send it Sunday Night Prime, one word, at EWTN.com. Sunday Night Prime at EWTN.com. And later on, I will be having 2 broadcasts with questions. I want to welcome our guest, Monsignor Deptula, who is a priest of the Diocese of Peoria. And we're speaking today about a great son of Peoria, Archbishop Fulton J. Sheen. And of course, you met Father Andrew many, many times. And Father Andrew was ordained by Archbishop Sheen. The first one he ever ordained, right?
After the council, after the Vatican Council, yes. He was Bishop of Rochester.
Oh, that's right, he was Bishop of Rochester. So, we've got a very interesting program with a lot of things about Fulton J. Sheen, and a great man. And Father Andrew is the postulator of the cause of beatification of Bishop Sheen. When I was a kid, I was helping around when Bishop Sheen, Monsignor Sheen, was in our parish, and he called me Pete. I remember that I was Pete to Bishop Sheen. Then I became Brother Benedict Joseph, and then finally Father Benedict Joseph. So I followed him around. So Monsignor, we're so welcome to have you here.
It's great to be here with you, Father Benedict.
And tell us, what's it be like to be in charge of a cause?
Oh, it's a tremendous blessing to be in charge of this cause. When my bishop asked me to become the executive director of the foundation to kind of really head up the work of the cause, I guess it's 3 or 4 years ago now, I was kind of overwhelmed by this prospect. But it's been a transformational kind of experience for my own life, for my own priesthood, and a blessing to meet people from around the country, even around the world, whose lives have been deeply touched by this holy priest of Peoria, Fulton Sheen.
Well, of course, I had to tell you, we always thought he came from New York. You know, everybody assumed that he was a New Yorker. Peoria, how did we get to Peoria? And I went out, and I had a very wonderful visit. Before you were ordained, I gave a retreat to the priests.
I remember when you came that summer.
Yeah. We had a great time.
And Fulton Sheen is, of course, a great son of the heartland.
Yes.
Was born in a little bitty town, actually outside of town, to farm family, really. His parents were farmers and businessmen, but moved right to the city of Peoria so their children could attend Catholic schools. Fulton Sheen grew up in our cathedral parish, went to cathedral grade school, prayed in our cathedral, and was ordained a priest of Peoria.
Where did he go to the seminary?
He went first to St. Viator's in Bourbonnais, Illinois, and then to St. Paul Seminary up in St. Paul, Minnesota.
Isn't that interesting? So he didn't go to Rome or anything like that?
No, of course, after ordination, he went on to study, to get his famous agrégé degree from Louvain University. He did study and teach in Rome and London. He was quite international, even as a young priest. But his formation is thoroughly Midwestern.
Well, that degree we should mention. It's a very unusual degree, agrégé. What does that mean? He's a
kind of a super doctorate, is the way I've heard it explained, and that you could be, if you get that degree, you can almost teach in any faculty, I guess, of Catholic universities in Europe. So the exam for that was so demanding. It was a public exam where the person, would be questioned all day long. It was a whole day exam, and I understand that hundreds of professors would come just to listen, to view that exam. And then it's interesting, you knew how you passed. You have to go back to your room after you were grueled all day with the questions and so on, and you knew you passed if you got a knock on the door, and that meant come down to a dinner they were going to have in your honor. And they said you could tell how well you did on the exam by what they served as a drink at the meal. If you just passed, you got water. If you did a little better, you got beer. If you did fairly well, you got wine. And if you did very, very well, you got champagne. And they had buckets and buckets of champagne. Now, I don't know if you didn't pass. I guess you had to go out to a fast food place to get a meal for yourself. But that's what happened. He got buckets and buckets of champagne. That's how well he did, and extraordinary.
Well, Monsignor, Monsignor Deptula, you, of course, much later than Bishop Sheen, you have met him, I'm sure, when you were a young priest, right?
No, I never had the chance to meet Fulton Sheen in life. I feel myself kind of that blessed second generation that has discovered him.
Die?
He died in December of 1979.
Oh, I see. See, because I'm around, I grew up with Bishop Sheen around. He came to spoke in our parish, and so I don't forget that it was so long ago.
32 years ago.
Yes, and well, now, tell us about the possibility of his cause. And I want Father Andrew to tell us about the cause.
About the cause? Well, I feel very blessed to be a part of the foundation and of the cause. In the beginning, I had joined the Archbishop Sheen Foundation, and, we saw the cause, finally, the competence or the authority to conduct that cause was given to Bishop Jenke by the Holy See, and I was so glad when he took that cause. And then I know, in order to open a cause, of course, there's two things that are required. First would be the proof that people think the individual man or woman who's up for possible canonization was saintly. And of course, there was a lot of people told me that. They said, I guess, in his case, he was such a personality in the media, TV and radio before that. People probably never said, I wonder if he's going to be a saint. But I've met people who told me, I was just waiting. I wonder if anybody was going to do something for his cause. And certainly so many people admired him. So many people's lives were touched by him. So that was the first thing. I think we had to show that there was some kind of evidence that people thought of him as a saintly person. And then secondly, you have to be able to show that people who have prayed to him have received some favors. And in the beginning, we started to receive that kind of information. People would share how their lives were touched, and I'm sure Monsignor could tell so much more. He's been working more directly with the people who have been contacting the cause there, and have met some of the wonderful people, the potential. Well, we can't call them miracles, and only the Pope can declare it a miracle, but we certainly feel that something extraordinary has happened, and there's been a lot of evidence to that.
Well, tell us, Monsignor, what have you been saying here?
Well, really, as Father Andrew was explaining, every day into our offices in Peoria, we receive what I call stories of little miracles. Life-changing experiences where people who either knew Fulton Sheen and are kind of rekindled their relationship with him, or like I say, kind of a second generation of person gotten to know Fulton Sheen through his writings, teachings, television shows. how even to today, he continues to convert souls and to lead people to Christ. It's really very beautiful. In fact, I was telling Father Andrew earlier, we recently got a moving letter from a Californian seminarian for the Year for Priests. The foundation and our benefactors sent a copy of Sheen's book, A Priest is Not His Own, to each of the 5,000 seminarians of our country. And the seminarian got a copy of the book, and he was having some spiritual struggles and trying to kind of get adjusted to seminary life. Never really heard of Fulton Sheen. Read Sheen's book, and from that day forward has devoutly made his Eucharistic Holy Hour, fallen in love with Our Lady, has just really given himself to the work of formation. It's a beautiful testimony to how Sheen is forming a future generation of priests. Just as he touched so many people in his own life, he continues to touch people. But we've also, besides these little miracles, are even right now continuing to investigate, I guess, what might be full-blown alleged miracles of some really perhaps remarkable healings that were performed by God through the intercession of Fulton Sheen. We're investigating them. We'll, as Father said, we'll see what God and the Pope decide.
Way back, I recall, now by this time I was a priest. What year did Bishop Sheen die?
79.
79. So I was a priest, and I had been with different things. I went with him to give some talks in New Jersey and things like that. And, you know, he would a couple of times said, you know, I have to be careful, I'm vain. He used, have you ever heard that?
I've heard stories like that, yeah.
Yes. And because you're in public, and you've got to get the Episcopal stuff on, and you, and I watched that, and I thought to myself, here is this important man making that statement quietly to a few people. Isn't that a kind of great humility?
In his autobiography, he talks about how he struggled with vanity, even pride. He was a superstar. He was a rock star.
Yes.
People would line the streets of towns he arrived in and scream out his name. It's almost hard to imagine in 2011 a Catholic superstar like that. And so he talks quite honestly about that struggle. And I think even that is testimony to his sanctity.
Yes.
We don't canonize God. God doesn't need to be canonized. We canonize human beings who go through conversion experiences.
I was very impressed by the fact that he saw himself as something of a penitent.
Yeah.
And of course, being public life and dressed as a bishop and all the usual stuff, he saw through it. And I watched him very carefully one evening when he was speaking, and I watched this, and he didn't take himself too seriously. He did not. Now, when we come back, I want to talk about, there was a certain amount of clerical hostility to Archbishop Sheen, and probably more than any other bishop in recent years, because he was so popular, and they used to, what did they call Milton Berle?
Milton Berle, yes.
They used to call him
Uncle Milty.
and then they called Sheen
Uncle Fulty.
Uncle Fulton. And he went through that, and in a very, very edifying way of pushing this off. He didn't make a big to-do, false humility, but that humility was there. And I don't know, do you remember this, Father Andrew? He had a car, he had a chauffeur who drove him to all these different things. And the side windows to the windows were blocked. There were something on them, so you
couldn't see him.
Couldn't see him.
Maybe they didn't want the notoriety there. You know, I received a letter once in the office there as a vice postulator that a lady said, she said, I saw him once in New York City. She said, he was walking ahead of me, and she said, I ran ahead of him, turned around. She said, yes, it's him. And she started, like, you know, here it was, right out in public, right in the street, and she sort of jumping up and down, and, you know, that she was meeting Bishop Sheen. But I imagine he must have gotten that so much because he, you know, he was on the television with an estimated audience of between 25 and 30 million people. Yes. That he was a household name and figure, you know, so people recognized him.
We have to have our break right now, or otherwise I'll get fired. So we'll be back in a couple of minutes. Monsignor, one of the things that we've been talking about, both before the program and now, there was a certain amount of hostility to Bishop Sheen, and perhaps a certain amount of jealousy, because without a doubt, he was the best known Catholic priest in modern time. Before that time, another very popular priest, Father Coughlin, got very much involved in politics, and although he was very popular, the church was very, very uncomfortable with Father Coughlin. And I think when Bishop Sheen started to get popular, they were afraid that he might be like a Coughlin, and he was totally 100% different. But tell us about, how do people feel about him in Peoria?
Oh, in Peoria, he was loved in his own day. Of course, even as a very young priest, he was sent as an assistant pastor by our bishop, the Bishop of Peoria, almost really as an exercise in humility to see if this brilliant young priest would be obedient. And as an assistant pastor, he transformed his very poor little kind of inner city parish on the south side of Peoria, and was beloved by the people. And to this day, that affection in the city of Peoria continues for Fulton Sheen. He returned home many times. He still has probably hundreds of relatives in the city of Peoria and in the countryside around. His memory is still very much alive in Peoria.
I bet you a good many of our audience don't know that. I would never have thought of that, you know. New Yorkers are kind of cynical, and they say, well, does it play in Peoria, you know? Does it work in Peoria?
I can testify that the buffalo have not roamed Main Street in Peoria for a long time. And we have a lot of great things, including a great memory, a great love for Fulton Sheen.
But he went there quite often.
Quite regularly. He returned there. He was a regular speaker at, of course, his alma mater. He graduated from Spalding High School, the Catholic high school in the city of Peoria. And we have a beautiful museum dedicated to him. Buses now come to pray in the cathedral in Peoria where Fulton Sheen prayed. So, yeah, he's still very much a part of our local community.
Are any of his relatives around?
Oh, quite a few still live in the Midwest, in central Illinois.
Did he have brothers and sisters?
He had three brothers whose relatives now continue to live. They're spread out too. There's some obviously here in the New York area, in Chicago, but a good number in central Illinois.
He was the oldest of the four boys. He was a colic child, and what's interesting about his name Fulton, Fulton actually was his mother's maiden name, and what happened was, being the oldest of the four boys, there were three boys born close together in age, and because he was colic, he often cried as a little child, and the maternal grandparents, the Fultons, would come and help their daughter and they would take him out and stroll him through the town in a little stroller, and people would see him. They would see the little child, they'd see the maternal grandparents, they'd say, oh, this is Fulton's kid, this is Fulton's child. And the name Fulton began to stick to him. And what happened was, when his grandfather, the maternal grandfather, took him to the school, to the St. Mary's Cathedral parochial school, to sign him up, the sister asked, what is the child's name? And he said, Fulton. So the name, because he liked it, the name stuck with him. And years later, somebody said to him, you know, there's no St. Fulton. And he said, well, not yet. So I wonder if he had a little premonition someday he would be up for canonization. Yeah. But that's an interesting. He was baptized Peter John Sheen. Peter John Sheen. And interesting too. His mother, the day of his baptism, his mother dedicated him to the Blessed Mother, and he always felt. He said that dedication was like a magnet that kept drawing him to Our Lady. You know?
He renewed that consecration on the day of his ordination, too. And I don't think he even knew at that time that his mother had consecrated him at baptism, and he renewed that consecration when he was ordained in St. Mary's Cathedral in Peoria.
Now, here's an interesting thing for many of our audience. He did not go to Rome to study.
Right.
He studied at Louvain, and Louvain was a famous Catholic seminary for graduate students, and it was very common for very bright priests or seminarians to be sent to Louvain. I think it rather stopped at the Second World War. You couldn't go there. And then it started up again, and I'm sure there are still students at Louvain today. But that was what he was, one of the Louvain men. And now, one of the things that people know about him in New York, of course, that he was famous. He couldn't walk down the street. But he did not take it seriously. He used to laugh about the whole, and I have heard him do this, you know, make a joke about himself, you know. Some little lady would say, oh, he's got to be a saint. He said, start praying. I got a long way to go. He would say things like that.
Every talk, it was a talk or a parish mission, he always began with a little joke. Some say it's kind of his Irish sensibilities, but I think even that's a sign of his sanctity. When God is the only thing we take seriously, we can laugh at everything else, including ourselves.
Oh yes, there's always, like when I was a high school student, and he'd be coming out to Montclair, where I was going, and he'd be speaking up there, and we'd all go, and you'd start out with humor, but you ended up right up against the wall. Absolutely. Now, here's a little secret, and at first I didn't know about this. He'd give the same talk several times because he prepared it well. It was well thought out. And I went to a couple of things, and I heard the whole talk twice, and I couldn't believe that. I thought, as a high school kid, they make one for each event. I've been doing it for many years myself. So are you, Father?
So do I, yes. Sure. That's one good thing about going to different audiences. You know, for them it's new.
That's right.
You know?
And television is very dangerous. To be very careful what you say on television.
You know, when you were talking before, Father Ben, about him, you know, he kind of had a little bit of a self-effacing, you know, he would not draw attention to himself, and he would even joke about himself, as Monsignor said that before. There's that story told where he was at St. Patrick's Cathedral. I think he was still a Monsignor, and he was on radio. Remember, he was on radio, the Catholic Hour, for 20 years, you know. And so this man came up to him, because you recognize him as a priest with a Roman collar and so on, but he didn't know who he was, because on radio, of course, you don't see anything. And he said to him, you know, Father, I'd like to go to confession. He said, you know that Monsignor Sheen, he was on the radio, he said some things that disturbed a couple of my friends, and I got so angry at him, and, you know, he shouldn't have said these things, and so on. And he said, I think I need to go to confession because I was so angry. And Bishop Sheen said to him, you know, I feel that way about him myself a lot, you know, so I'm sure you didn't really mean to be angry. You can wait until your next time that you go to confession. So the man, as he was leaving, he said, you know, if only there were more priests in the church like you, we'd have a wonderful church. So he was in some classical situations that make you laugh, that's for sure. You know?
And one of the interesting things, you know, when he got old, he was going to retire to Mary Manning Walsh Home in New York, which is run by the Carmelite Sisters of the Aged and Firm. And one of those sisters, a wonderful friend of mine, Mother Aloysius, she was there to receive him. I'm quite sure he's the one who received him. And that was to be very shortly. And then he got very sick, and he never got to Mary Manning Walsh. I think he died quite quickly. Do you know how he died? Is it heart trouble?
He'd had heart trouble for quite a while.
That's
and
right.
He was well into his 80s, so part of it was...
Yeah, he had 3 heart operations in his last year.
Yes.
And by the way, all of them occurred on feasts of Our Lady. He made a remark of that, I think in his autobiography. He said something about that and how, you know, Our Lady had sending him the cross, you know, and he accepted that suffering, and it was very, very difficult. But you're right. I think you had told me too, Father, how didn't Mother Aloysius make a comment of how he was so, you know, anything they asked that he would do, and he never made a fuss? Or...
Oh, yes. There was no fuss when he came to join. He never actually got there.
Oh, he did.
But he came, and she was waiting to be impressed by Bishop Sheen, you know. And she said, he was just like a quiet, ordinary man. It was not the person that you see on television. And she herself was impressed. And he was going to stay there, but he got so sick that he couldn't. He went to the hospital, and then he passed away.
He died a truly holy death. He was at home. He died either right in his chapel or at the entrance to his private chapel, in his apartment.
He just moved there. He didn't move out of that.
Right.
I know that little apartment building in the 30s on the east side. I forget precisely what. Did you ever go to that?
No, I've never been there, but I think maybe someday it might be nice to have a plaque or a memorial there where the site of his death.
They didn't keep that apartment. Too bad. Well, see, it would be very expensive to keep that. But it was an interesting part of New York. It was a part of Peoria, you know, a very important part there. But in New York, he was a very important part of New York. And he was greatly admired by non-Catholics, Protestants, and particularly Jewish people. They're the ones that called him Uncle Fulton. And every Sunday afternoon, you may remember this, Father Amber, I was in high school. We had dinner at 1 o'clock on Christmas, Sunday. We had dinner, and we just got finished, and he was coming on at 2 o'clock, the Catholic hour. And the radio was on the table. We had just finished his dessert, and they'd clean off the dishes, but we didn't wash the dishes. And we all sat there and listened. And then when we got finished, we said the rosary together. That was part of the whole thing, because he was pushing the rosary, and Father Peyton was also pushing the rosary. They were, when I look back at them, those were more devout times than they are today. Yeah.
And you know, it's amazing that both of them, Archbishop Sheen and Father Peyton, both up for canonization, and wouldn't they be just such a great combination for our church throughout the world, of course, because the whole church benefits by a canonization, but especially for America, they were just two outstanding voices in the church in America.
Well, we'll have a little break now. We'll be back, and for the last part of our broadcast. I'm hoping you're enjoying it. Well, we're continuing our discussion, fascinating discussion, with Monsignor Deptula, who is supporting and running the Archbishop Sheen broadcast and his potential beatification. And Father Andrew is the postulator, the man the vice postulator. One of the things that we particularly are interested in, and our audience will be, there is a film coming out on Bishop Sheen. Could you tell us about it?
Sure. I think it's a very well done film. You know, I'm sure you two fathers would agree. It's amazing in the modern world what the church asks priests to do. I never would have thought I'd be the executive producer of a film, but I am of this film. And it's really, I think, a well done biography. Begins with Fulton Sheen's early days in Peoria, right up to his moving encounter with Blessed John Paul II, really just a few weeks, a month or two before Fulton Sheen's death in December of 1979, and highlights different aspects of his life. It's a beautiful way for people who knew Fulton Sheen to kind of rekindle their love for him. I think it's also an excellent introduction to a new generation of people who may have heard of Fulton Sheen or maybe somewhat familiar with his writings. It's a great way to get to know his life.
Was it well known, or known at least, that he was terminally ill?
I think he had been ill really for quite a few years. In fact, I think he had to retire a little early as Bishop of Rochester because his health was in decline. And in those last years, really from the 1970s to 1979, he'd had different health problems, but it was really that last year where he was particularly ill.
And he was made Bishop of Rochester, and a lot of people, I don't want people in Rochester to be mad at me, but a lot of people speculated that he did not want to become a diocesan bishop. And what a public person like that is not necessarily capable of a lot of administration and things like that. And it was not part of his life at all. And suddenly he was Bishop of Rochester. And I think that he was relieved when he could believe there. And by that time, he was getting ill. But let us say that I've been back up to Rochester. It's a place I know a lot of people. And his memory is very much cherished by people in Rochester, right? You were there.
By myself, yes. I still remember the day that one of the brothers, I was down in the kitchen at the friary in Geneva. It was called Immaculate Heart Seminary. And I was there in the kitchen getting a cup of coffee in the afternoon, and this brother comes running in, and the former bishop, Bishop Carney, had retired, and so we were waiting for the Holy See to appoint a new bishop. Well, he comes running in, he says, "Guess who our new bishop is?" And I was so excited to find out, because I knew whoever it was going to probably be the bishop to ordain me. And he said, He said, "It's Bishop Sheen." Well, I thought he was kidding. Yeah, I said, "Oh, they're going to send him here," you know. And sure enough, they sent him up there, and then I got to meet him. It was really through the grace of God that we got to meet him, and then he agreed to ordain me, and I was ordained on March 16th, 1967, and that's when he said, "You're the first priest that I've ordained since the council." And he spoke about the renewal of the priesthood. He made a statement which I've often quoted. He said, if there's any key to the reform of the Catholic Church and the salvation of the world today, he said it lies in the renewal of the priesthood. And he was saying that all the way back then. You know, he was, even in the homily he gave.
His book, too, his book on the priesthood.
Yeah, he spoke on the priesthood. Yeah, his books and so on. And even, you know, he made a statement that, he said, we're beginning, he says, are we losing our image that the young people are not being attracted to, wanting to be priests? You know, so he was concerned about that. And of course, the last 10 years, Monsignor was saying that he, despite sometimes his illnesses or things like that, he often gave retreats to priests. And I think he was so concerned about that.
Yes, that was very common.
Yeah.
Yes, and he was ill. He
Yeah.
was quite ill.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. He was very, very well respected and received by the Protestant and especially the Jewish people.
Yeah.
They, as I said, they called him Uncle Fulton. And he was held in great respect because he was at the beginning of ecumenism. And when he would talk, he would include other people, and that was ahead of the time at that point. Right. Oh, yes.
He was very cutting edge in so many ways, including ecumenism. Yeah. And I think part of it, in the best ecumenical fashion, he could reach out to others because he knew clearly who he was. Yes. He knew what it meant to be Catholic, what it meant to be a Catholic priest and a Catholic bishop. And when he was so secure in the knowledge of that truth, then he could legitimately engage other faiths and other traditions.
Yes, he was. Now, Father Monsignor, tell us, his family is around. Some are living in here in New York, I believe, and some, of course, in the Peoria area. Do you get to meet with them?
Oh, quite regularly. In fact, he has some cousins that are very active in the foundation, live down in Virginia, South Bend, Indiana, around Notre Dame. So he really has family around the country that are so quite active.
The foundation. What do you do with the foundation?
The foundation, I say, always exists for two central purposes. One is to advance the work for the cause of the beatification and canonization. So we work with the postulator in Rome, with Father Andrew as the vice postulator, to gather information about miracles and, of course, all the alleged miracles and all the information about his life and writings. All that was just sent over to the Holy Father, and that part of the cause is going very well. The second part, I think, is very much related and almost just as important, is the foundation works to lead others to Christ through Fulton Sheen's life and example. He's left us such a treasury of books and tapes and recordings that he still has a very important message for our day.
Well, Father Monsignor, how to get people nowadays, suppose they wanted to get a recording or a tape or a book, how do they get them?
Well, of course, many of his books are reprinted by, I think, almost every major Catholic publisher has some reprint of his books. In his own day, copyrights we weren't quite as legal a society as we are now. So he often gave away the copyrights to many of his books to different convents or organizations. So a lot of people, a lot of organizations have the rights to reprint his books. So you'll see them all over. But then he's still very much active. EWTN regularly shows his programs. He's all over YouTube. In fact, there are still some people who think he's alive because they see him on television so often. So he's still a multimedia kind of priest.
Well, people are listening. They certainly write into EWTN for some of his things are available. And my good friends, the Daughters of St. Paul, who run bookshops all over Canada, the United States, Europe, even the Daughters of St. Paul will get you anything you need, I assure you.
That's right.
You get them out of the directory, and my very good friends. So people would like to get things, do it through that way.
Yeah. They can get can't they get them through the website, our website? Do we have any information on that on our?
Through the archbishopsheencause.org, we kind of connect people to places where they can order books or recordings and copies of this new film. Ignatius Press is now re-releasing kind of a special edition of the film. One disc is our film, and another disc is I think it's 5 of kind of Sheen's best television programs.
This is from Ignatius Press.
Through Ignatius Press. And they can get there through our website, archbishopsheencause.org or sheenfilm.org.
I see. Say it again.
archbishopsheencause.org or sheenfilm.org, or of course through Ignatius Press.
One word.
But,
yes. See if we can get somebody to put that on the screen for us. Now, we were talking all this. What about the private, personal spirituality of Fulton J. Sheen? Because, you know, it's very difficult with a public person to reach behind and there. For instance, with a great pope, it's difficult to do this with Pope John Paul because it's hard to reach inside. If you have a very devout person who is just about spiritual things like Padre Pio, you can get touch with his spirituality. I was blessed myself because I was a close friend of Cardinal Cook, and I spoke about spiritual things with him many times. A most saintly and holy man. But other people didn't know that about him. He was a public figure. They did know that he was very humble.
That's an amazing thing too, Father Benedict, with regard to Archbishop Sheen, is that, you know, he won that Emmy in 1951. That was his first full year on television. And he got it as the most outstanding personality on television. I think he, in the voting, beat out Edward R. Murrow, and somebody even told me Jimmy Durante and Lucille Ball, but I can't be sure of those two, but I know Edward R. Murrow. And he won that award, and it's kind of like he achieved a success in the secular world that people recognize. You know, winning an Emmy on television. You know, by the way, when he went to get his Emmy, when they were doing the awards, you know, everybody's thanking their producers and directors. He says, he got his award, he said, I want to thank my writers, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. You know, and so,
I remember this. That was a great line.
So he got that award, which is, again, the secular world would stand in, awe of somebody winning an Emmy. But if he becomes a canonized saint, it's like he won the greatest award in the spiritual world, you know, to become a canonized saint. And you'd hardly think that's possible for the same person, but it's amazing what he did. And you know, you were mentioning before, Father, you mentioned a couple of times about his appeal to different religious groups. You know, I read somewhere where the percentage-wise, now of course there's not that many Jewish people compared to Protestants and Catholics, but percentage-wise, the largest religious group that watched him was Jewish. The second was Protestant, third was Catholic. And they
Catholics are stupid. You know?
Huh? Yeah.
Catholics are stupid.
Yeah, they had such admiration. Someone asked me one time, he said, how do you account for that? I said, well, I think he told them the truth and they admired him for it. You know, he just was very honest about life. That was his program, Life is Worth Living. And he told people that, yes, life is worth living. I saw in a tragic area there was a bridge where some people had actually jumped off that bridge and taken their lives, and to prevent that, to encourage people not to do that, they put that sign on both sides of the bridge, each way. Life is worth living, you know, and that's what he taught, and I think that's why people had such an esteem for him, you know. And
you talk about that life, kind of about the life behind the public life.
Yeah.
He did live such a deeply profound spirituality, and we get insights in that in his television programs, in his own writings, and I think really beautifully in his autobiography, which he purposely wrote to be published after his death. He kind of gives us a glimpse into what the mystery was, and it was profoundly Eucharistic. Yes. and Marian. He was a man that could work, a busy priest, could work 18 hours a day, travel the world as a great missionary, but he never missed an hour of prayer before the Blessed Sacrament. That was it was that silent time that was a secret to all of his eloquence.
Well, I remember somehow or other, and I don't remember why, I was in his apartment, this little house in the 30s, and it was one of these tall, thin buildings attached to all the other buildings there. Mm-hmm. They're all like three rooms across, but they may be 4 or 5 stores. So, and I went there, and somehow or other, I think I don't know how I got there, he wasn't there. I went to his chapel, and I came down the stairs, and it was a Eucharistic chapel. And right in the middle of it was a kneeler, a prie-dieu, and a couple of chairs on the side. But it was a chapel of adoration of the Blessed Sacrament. Now, the Blessed Sacrament was not exposed, but you could not do that for a private chapel. But there he was. And I was very impressed. Now, here you are, the postulator. What happens next?
Well, now that we've really presented to the Holy Father the bulk of the documentation about Fulton Sheen's life, virtue, and reputation of holiness, that's all being processed. The Congregation for the Cause of the Saints in Rome. It was recently reviewed by the Board of Theologians, and next the Board of Bishops and Cardinals, they'd advise the Holy Father, will review it, and then pending their favorable approval, that'll be passed on to the Holy Father. And sometime soon, if God wills, Fulton Sheen could be declared venerable. So that's kind of the track we're on. And meanwhile, we have begun the investigation into a third alleged miracle. There's already 2 alleged, kind of canonically investigated miracles that are already in Rome, and a new one has kind of surfaced from the Diocese of Peoria, and Father Andrew might be able to.
Can you speak about the 2 that have been...
Yeah, one was of a woman who was operated on, she had to have part of her lung removed. When they opened her up to operate, her pulmonary artery split lengthwise. She lost so much blood, the doctors were so assured she was going to die on the operating table that they sent word down from the operation, operating room, down to where the family was, and they said, bring the family into the morning room where they announced the death, the person. Well, she was there the family was there for 2 hours, and they said, well, what happened? And then they called up to the operating room. They said, well, she's not going to die, bring her back out of the room. And the husband of that woman said to me, he said, for 2 hours I just prayed to Bishop Fulton Sheen. And so that's why we felt that was a miracle, a possible miracle. And then another possible miracle was of a little boy whose name was Fulton. He was named Fulton 12 hours after he was born. He had 3 possible life-threatening conditions, and not only did he survive, but he has no after effects. One of them was a very serious form of sepsis. Sepsis is an infection of the blood, which with many little children, if it doesn't take their lives, it leaves them with problems later on. After this child has no problems. So his case seems to be the most advanced right now. But the one Monsignor was also talking about happened a year ago in Peoria to a little boy whose name is James Fulton. And the little boy was stillborn. And the mother gave birth at home, a midwife. They rushed the child to the hospital. The hospital did everything they could, even in the ambulance, to try to get the heart going. For 61 minutes, there were no signs of life. No breathing, no heartbeat, no brain waves. They call it the 000. And the doctors were ready to declare the child dead. And the mother started a prayer to Bishop Sheen. She had been praying to him all along, but she started this prayer, I think, to ask a favor. And all of a sudden, the baby started to breathe. So 61 minutes, even some of the doctors who were not believers, you know, they're not religious people. They said, we've never seen anything like this. So it seems like we have 3 good cases that we could present.
Oh, they're magnificent. But of course, magnificent.
Yeah.
I mean, those are...
and you know, even many things in finding out about his life. I got a letter the other day from a woman who told me when he was still alive, he appeared to her. You know, he may have actually had to give the bilocation. We know for sure that he seemed to work miracles in his lifetime, or at least cures. I got a letter from a woman, a woman. It was a woman. She had, as a child, she was in a hospital in Staten Island. She had 104 fever for 2 weeks. He prayed over her and told the parents the fever will break tonight. The child will leave tomorrow. So great things happened.
Well, Father Monsignor, I'm very grateful. We've used up all of our time, and thank you, Father Andrew, right from the inside, and we're very grateful. Please have a quiet prayer. O Lord, bless each and every one of us watching this program, and may we be inspired, Catholics or non-Catholics, by the virtue and goodness of this great man. We pray through Christ our Lord.
Amen.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Amen. And as always, I need you to help us with the keep of the program going, to keep the EWTN on. And our dear Mother Angelica is still going, fooling the ball. And she'll be hearing about this broadcast. And please send some envelopes to EWTN to keep it going. God bless and have a good day.